Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another fun and exciting new video. This week, if you haven't already looked at the title, which I'm sure you have, we're going to be editing images in Adobe Lightroom to show you guys how I personally edit some vintage looking images. So a while back, like I think a couple months, me and my sister went to this very cool looking retro cafe. And so we thought it'd be a cool place, interesting place to get some pictures. Now I'm going to be showing you guys how I decided to take the shots, what my camera settings were, and my own personal workflow for how I wanted to get the look that I wanted. So if you guys don't know me, my name is Isaac DeHo, also known as DEHO. Now let's jump right into Lightroom. Okay, so guys, we are in Lightroom now. Now, like I said, me and my sister went to this cool looking retro cafe place. And when we walked in, the first thing that we saw was this open car that screamed to me that we could use it for some interesting framings. I got some different angles, and these are the two pictures that I decided to edit for you guys. So the first thing I want to tell you is my settings. So I shot this with the 85, wide open at 1.8, and at ISO 200. Now you can see that the picture is really underexposed, and I knew that I could bring it up in post. I could bring up my exposure in post, so that wasn't exactly an issue for me, but I definitely could have brought my ISOs higher. It's good to keep your ISOs down just so you don't have to mess with all of that grain, and you don't have to use a lot of noise reduction to get rid of it. So this picture, this is what I'm going to be editing off of. I just shot through the where the windshield would be of the car, so this is where we're going to start. So first off, I'm obviously going to bring up the exposure a bit, and we can bring it maybe to there. That looks fine. We're not going to mess with the contrast yet, because we're going to do that with our shadows and our blacks and our curves. Now with the highlights, what I typically like to do with sliders like these is I like to bring it all the way to 100% to 0 just to see what it will do to the image. Now if we bring down the highlights, it'll start to flatten the image, and if we bring it up, it'll just bring the exposure up of the wall and her face. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower it down. I'll go to about 20. Now the shadows, pay attention here. We're going to be uncovering a lot of these pictures. You'll see if we slide this up, more of the pictures and the stuff on the wall will come to light. If we slide it down, it'll just become darker. So I think I'm just going to slide it up just a little bit so we can get a little bit more details in those shadows. I think right here is fine. Now with the whites, now again you want to make sure that you're looking at your histogram. You typically on a well-lit shot, which this wasn't because it was a very gloomy and rainy day, and the inside of the store was not lit at all. It was really dark in the restaurant. So it is underexposed, but it just depends what kind of the look you're going for. So I'm going to bring these whites up just a little bit. Those are going to mess with my brightest parts of the image along with my highlights. I think right here is fine. We'll go 40. How about that? That looks good. Then our blacks, we're going to bring our blacks down. Now because I brought up the shadows, we lost some contrast, so I'm going to bring the blacks a little bit down. That should be good there. Now what I do in Lightroom is I just move down the sliders from top to bottom. But usually one of the first things that I do is enable profile corrections, because that will typically bring up the image, and remove chromatic aberration. Now we don't have anything in here obviously because we weren't shooting in any bright conditions where we had to deal with that, but I check it anyways. So we're going to move down. We're going to bring the clarity up because I do like some clarity in my shots, but we're also going to mess with that later. Now we're going to bring the vibrance down to maybe about -10 because we want this to feel vintage. I don't know if I want color popping. We'll see by the end of this video where I go with this. So I'm not going to touch the saturation. We're going to mess with this tone curve though. So I'm going to bring up the midtones. If you guys don't know, these are your blacks, your shadows, your midtones, your highlights, and your whites. And so if I was to bring up the midtones, that's going to affect her skin and the midtones. If I bring up this point, it brings up the shadows. If I lower it, it messes with the shadows, so you guys can see what that does. So I'm just going to bring up the midtones just a little bit, just to brighten her up a little bit more. I'm also going to add a point here, and then I'm going to bring this point down so we can add some contrast in the shadows. And at the same time, I'm going to raise the shadows so the crushed blacks will not be too harsh. It'll give it that nice film look that looks really cinematic, and it gives it a type of aesthetic that I really like. And I'm just going to bring these highlights down just a little bit. And then if you want to see what that looks like before and after, here's the before, a little bit flat, and then a little bit after. We brightened it up, added some contrast, and there you go. Okay, so next we're going to mess with our reds. Now the red of the seat and the car, I actually like. I think all I'm going to do is just saturate it a little bit because I want that red to pop. So let's go 23. And I'm also going to brighten it up a little bit. So I'll just go +8. Okay, that looks pretty good there. Want a before and after of the red. And then the oranges. Now the oranges are going to affect her skin. Now the same thing with these sliders. I slide it from bottom to top, top to bottom, just to see what it's affecting in the image. And so I think all I'm going to do for the oranges, because it's mainly her skin tones, and typically you don't want to make the skin tones look unnatural. So I'm just going to saturate her skin tones just a little bit, and then I'm going to brighten her up as well. And then the yellows, if you look at the wall, the yellows are mostly affecting the colors on the wall. So actually what I'm going to do there is I'm going to desaturate it and take that yellow out so we can get more of that white, and then I'm going to brighten it by sliding the luminance slider up, and then I think it looks good right there. So that's all the colors that we're going to mess with in our HSL color tab. So if you want to see it before and after, we got rid of that yellow that you see here. We made it white, and then we also changed a little bit of the color of her skin and the car and the chair. Now moving down to split toning, this is where we can have a little bit of fun. This is where I like to create that vintage type look. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring my saturation up quite a bit just to see what colors I would be adding to the shot. So if we slide this across, I'm just going to look at what looks interesting or what looks good. Now I really want to make sure that I'm sticking to that vintage vibe. So maybe I'm going to go to like a yellow orange type look. And then I'm just going to bring that down to where I think it looks good. That looks fine right there. And then the shadows, I think I'm going to leave that in the reds, and then I'm just going to saturate the shadows with a little bit of red. Now don't worry about the skin tones yet, we'll mess with those in a second. We're just going to keep moving down. So for sharpening, I always sharpen my photos, but what you want to do is you want to go to the masking slider. And when you're here, you want to go to your Alt Option key, hold it down, and then while you're holding it down, move the masking slider, and you'll see that the more you move to the right, the more sharp the edges are going to be of your sharpness. And then once you move it to the left, the more feathered it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it quite a bit back, maybe go to 15, and then I'm going to sharpen that to 70. Okay, cool. So as you guys notice, I did bring my exposure up quite a bit, but because I shot at a low ISO, there's not a lot of noise in the image, as you can see. But I'm just gonna add some noise reduction just because I want to make sure that my image is clean. Then if you want to zoom in, you can see that there is not too much grain, and if anything, it actually adds to the image, I think, because we still want to keep to that vintage look. So going down, we already messed with our profile and our chromatic aberration. So we're just going to go down, and then all I'm going to do is drag my blue primary hue slider a little bit to the left. And that's going to affect mostly her skin tones and the brightness of the reds. So I'm going to slide that a little bit down. I think 12 looks good. That looks good right there. Okay, so now that we have an overall look of the image, now we're going to start messing with specific parts. So I want to make sure that because she is the subject, I want her to stand out. So I'm going to grab a radial filter here, and then I'm going to draw it around her. And then if you hold your mouse over this little circle, you can see what is selected, or you can also click this checkpoint here and then it will show what is masked. So I know it's masked now, and then I'm just going to invert it, and this will affect everything outside of that mask. So as you can see, it's affecting the room. So what I want to do is I want to draw the attention to her. So I'm going to bring that exposure down, which decreases the exposure of the room. That looks pretty good right there. Now what I want to do next is I want to work on her face, most particularly her eyes. So we're going to come in here, zoom in just a little bit, and then we're going to take another radial filter. We're going to draw it around her eyes, make sure it is fit around there, and then we're just going to raise the exposure up a little bit because we want those eyes to pop. Now all you have to do is duplicate that, right click, duplicate it, and then move it on to the next eye. That looks good there. Okay, so now we have popping eyes. Our subject is in the middle of the frame, and we have a little vignette around her just so the viewer is drawn towards the subject. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a green tint to the image. Now I think that adds to this vintage type style, so I'm just going to drag it down just a little bit, ever so slightly. I think that's good right there. Okay, and then I think the last thing that I'm going to do is mess with the grain. Now I said that it's kind of counterintuitive to add noise reduction and then add grain, but just to emphasize the look, we're going to add an amount. We're going to slide up, and you can also zoom into your image just to see how much grain is getting put in. So we're going to zoom in right here. We're also going to increase the size of the grain, let's say 45, and then you also want to make sure that you don't add too much to where the image looks like sandpaper. So I'm just going to add it maybe 23. Now one last thing before we are done with this image, I'm going to make another radial filter around her, and I'm just going to brighten up her overall exposure because we already made a filter around her to affect the environment around her, but now we're going to make a filter just for her, and we're going to brighten her up just a little bit. And we don't want to do it too much because we don't want it to make it look unnatural, and I think it's pretty good right there. That's like our sweet spot. Now if we zoom out, that is our subject and the area around her. Now I really like that image. I like the way this turned out. Red and yellow is a big part of getting that vintage type style. Adding that to the image is just going to give you a really old filmic vibe. Now what's cool about Lightroom is that you can right click, go to your settings, and copy them. Now you can select what you like copied. So let's say I'm fine with this being copied, and I press copy, and then I want to go to this image, and then I want to add those same settings. I just right click again, and I go to paste settings. And so now I already have this very filmic vintage look. I just have to change some things. Maybe I want to change the exposure of the subject once again. So I'm just going to add a radial filter, bring up that exposure, and I think that image is done right there. Super fast, super quick. A little pro tip for you guys for copying and pasting settings from one picture to another. Now if you want to look at a before and after of what we created, just hit the backslash tab on your key, and then you'll see a before and after. So we can see it's very underexposed, and we brought it up, put some color into it, and this is the final image. So guys, that's how I personally edited these vintage type style photos that I took with my sister. I really like the way that they turned out, and I really like the location because I did not expect a place like this to end up in Kalibo. Now I hope you take these tips and work them into your own photos, whether you want to use some of them or not. I hope you guys enjoyed this little editing tutorial, and I hope you guys learned something. Now if you want me to do more tutorials like this, like this video, give a comment of what kind of videos in general of what you'd want to see, and I'll see what I can do. So thank you guys for tuning in and watching this week's video. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.